John Cobb, greetings. My apologies for that, John. Jay, thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the October monthly gathering of Living Earth Movement for international cooperation on climate solutions, especially between the U.S. and China. Imagine that. So we're going to have a little presentation today on a special initiative that John Cobb brought forth. We have a couple other people coming in. That's very good. We have a couple of new visitors. We're thrilled to have you here today. John Cobb, we are recording. We're ready for you to welcome our gathering. You are muted, however. We want to hear your words of wisdom.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, when you said I was going to introduce some new thing, I'm confused.
Well, it's not a new thing. It may be a new thing to a couple people who are here, but what we're doing with the Understanding China papers and the conversations. That's
Oh,
the new thing.
okay. Well, we are on the verge of going public with them, right?
Yes, sir.
And today is kind of a celebration of what we have achieved and the decision to share them. And I'll just remind you that their purpose is to counter the propaganda that is so overwhelmingly negative toward China, since the United States considers China its number one enemy and uses that language repeatedly. And we don't expect that the way in which the behavior of your number one enemy is reported is entirely objective, neutral, and so forth. On the contrary, it is designed to generate as much hostility and resentment as possible. And that has put an end to the possibility of cooperation between the two nations. Yet cooperation between China and the United States in leading the world to respond wisely to such issues as global warming is absolutely essential. So how can we get around that? And one thing that no one has forbidden us to do is to write our own papers on the topics in which China has been particularly unfairly critiqued. And we have to be very careful that this does not seem like it is the Chinese side, so that we have the papers publishing the American side and then this little publication of the Chinese propaganda. I think sometimes we are leaning over backwards to not be too favorable to China in order to reduce the danger that we will be dismissed in that way. But I think most honorable people who read our papers will say we may have made some mistakes. We are certainly not inerrant, but we are certainly closer to an objective and neutral statement that I'm hoping can, for many Americans, counter the outright falsehoods with extremely selective reporting of the American press. So I think today we will be putting finishing touches on a couple more papers. How many will that make, Charles? About 14?
We're 14 or 15. I'm still in the process of counting them.
Okay. All right. So let's go to it.
Well, I'd just like to say that for about a year now, about a half a dozen of us have been meeting almost every Thursday. Um, Most of them are here. It's Robert DeTrano, Bruce Hanson, Hamas Albert, Celeste Hogan, David McCary helps us. He's not here yet today. I keep looking for him. I do expect him to be here. And we take turns, we refine, we polish, we refine, and we're going to share 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 papers today, depending upon how many questions we can stir up, how much conversation we can generate, and where we go from there. And we're going to begin with one of the longer papers. Most of them are 1 page. The vision is to have 1 page papers. A few of them have just evolved beyond that or have to be beyond that. And we're going to have someone read the paper and then we'll have a conversation around it. We're going to begin with a paper. Let's see, have someone else I need to watch in. Tomas, when I have papers up on the screen, help me watch for people coming into the room because they don't show up as clearly as the person who just jumped in. So I'm going to go over now. I'm going to share a paper and we're going to bring up, let's see, do we see Chinese versus American ways of thinking on the screen? Robert,
Yes.
take it away.
Okay, I'm Robert DeTrano. I'm going to read the paper on Chinese versus American ways of thinking. From the moment of our birth, we develop our identity. Who am I? What do I care about? How do I see the people around me? Chinese and Americans learn different answers to these questions. Americans learn and believe that they, as individuals, are most important. For Americans, the me is paramount. Chinese are taught that the group, the family, the village, the school, the workplace, and the nation are most important. Chinese are taught that the we is more important than the me. American culture, like many Western cultures, is individualistic. Chinese culture is collectivist. The way people eat their restaurant meals illustrates this difference. Americans go to restaurants in groups of 2 to 4. Each person orders her or her own dish, a hamburger for dad, a salad for mom, a BLT sandwich for Jimmy, and a bowl of tomato soup for Jane. Chinese go to restaurants in groups, including grandparents, aunts, and uncles, maybe 10 people at a large table. One person is assigned to order dishes. That person understands the dietary needs and preferences of the others and requests up to 10 platters of food that all can share. Some tables rotate so that each diner can take what they like from one of the platters. The Chinese see the physical and social world as a collection of or an extension of families. They tend to see the big picture, while Americans pay more attention to the details. In examining ancient Chinese landscape paintings like those of Guoxi, a Chinese observer sees the unified harmony of humanity and nature. An American might look at the human figures and ask, what is this farmer doing? The Chinese observer considers the farmer as in unity with nature. In time as well as space, the Chinese see history differently. Chinese are taught from early childhood about the thousands of years of history that preceded the creation of the modern Chinese state. They see the similarities and the differences between the past and the present. Americans have a much shorter history and thus tend to see other parts of the world, including China, through the lens of the past 50 to 100 years, rather than several hundreds of years. For example, Americans may think of China as starting with the Chinese Communist state in 1949. Because of this shorter view and the negative view painted by American propagandists, Americans know about the excesses of the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Chinese see a general increase in well-being, living standards, longevity, health, and education since 1949. During his interview with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, Henry Kissinger asked Zhou his opinion about the French Revolution. Zhou answered that it was too early to say. This is an example of an important difference between Chinese and American thinking. The Chinese view of history includes the hundreds of years that preceded the creation of the modern state, especially the period between 1839 and 1939, known as the Century of Humiliation, a period during which Western countries, including the United States, executed wars of conquest and imperial domination over China, and forced the then weak Chinese state to submit to 21 unequal treaties that ceded large territories to Western countries and Japan. Chinese will thus concede to the wrongs committed during the Great Leap and the Cultural Revolution, but see these in the context of China breaking out of its dependence on Western and Japanese domination. Chinese thinking is process rather than results-oriented. In America, the outcome is paramount. In China, the process of how one gets from point A to point B is also important. In discussing how China would improve its economy, Chinese leader and reformist Deng Xiaoping said that it would be done as one crosses a river, by feeling the stones. This difference sometimes leads to conflicts in business and diplomatic relations between Chinese and Americans. Some have said that American culture is like a rock and Chinese culture is like a river. If you put the rock in the river, it will not move, but the river will flow around it and create a foam and a gradual erosion and shaping of the rock to create a harmonious whole. In executing contractual work plans with Chinese companies or government agencies, Americans should not be surprised to occasionally find that the Chinese entity wants planned modifications that are not written into the contract. This is not reneging or backing out. The Chinese representative will want to discuss changes that allow a more efficient realization of the common goal. Chinese children learn relationship rules from their parents and teachers. These rules derive from early Chinese philosophers like Confucius. They include social hierarchies within families and between families and government. In the Chinese language, people address each other according to their profession and rank. Li is Dr. Li, Wang is Teacher Wang, Guo is Manager Guo, and Peng is Driver Peng. Chinese values also include values for hard work, obedience to authority, respect for elders, and traditional rituals. Americans strongly believe in values from the European Enlightenment, including individual freedom in political and economic life, and creativity in science and art. These differences do not cause problems unless Americans or Chinese try to impose their values on the other group. Americans have an inherent tendency to try to impose their version of democracy, which includes elections and civil liberties, on other cultures, including the Chinese. The tendency to impose European values like democracy on China is a result of another difference in thinking. Americans think linearly. For example, an American might think, democracy is good, therefore we should spread democracy. Therefore, if there is resistance to the spread of democracy, we should use violence to overcome this resistance. Chinese thinking is not linear. A Chinese person might think democracy is good, but what kind of democracy, in what circumstances, and where? Sometimes it may not be good, but that is for the local population to decide. It is not something that can be imposed from outside. In general, the Chinese are much more peaceful people and nation than the Americans. During its long 3,000-year history, Chinese wars have mostly been internal and involved their neighbors. Since the creation of the modern Chinese state in 1949, Chinese external wars have been few and with very low casualties and destruction, with one notable exception, which is the Korean War. Unlike the United States, which has 750 overseas military bases, China has only one. Both the Chinese people with whom I have discussed world geopolitics and Chinese leaders have emphasized the importance of peace. Even the author of the classic Art of War, Sun Tzu, said, "To fight and conquer is in all your battles is not supreme excellence, is not supreme excellence. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting." That's the end of the paper.
Thank you, Robert. You could use the reactions function to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, share a comment. Did you learn something? I certainly did the first time I heard this paper. Help us get some discussion going here. There'll be a prize. Everybody gets a prize. Vivian, I've missed your smile. Celeste, is that a handout? Hers.
Well, I have a few points. I made a lot of notes. I really like them, but I want to hear our American friends maybe give some comments and see the bubbles a bit, and I will come back and respond.
Thank you. I'm counting on you. Someone? No comments, no questions?
Well, I will try one. I don't have the passage in front of me, but I think saying that the American is interested in the outcome and the Chinese in the way of getting to the outcome. Is that correct?
That's more or less correct, yes.
And then it also implied that the Chinese would be interested in the more specific features of the outcome, and the American would be satisfied if it sort of fitted into the right type. Have I understood that?
I'm not sure where that is in the essay. I think I don't quite understand your comment, John.
Well, I didn't quite understand what I thought I was told, and so I'm asking for help. Can we go back to the place in the paper where these two distinctions between the Chinese and the Americans were made?
Yes, do you recall where it was in the paper? Are you seeing the paper?
Yeah, let's see.
Process versus results, outcome,
Results.
experiment.
The process of how one gets there. This difference sometimes leads to conflicts in business and diplomatic relations. And I'm sure this is accurate, but I need to have it explained a little bit. Some have said American culture is like a rock. Maybe it's
This is actually an area where we spent time reworking this for clarification. In this particular point, I had asked a question that Robert thought was an objection, so he made some refinements as it is now.
Okay.
So again, these are works in process. They're going to continue to evolve, especially as the world changes.
I would just like to hear some example. I don't think it should be too difficult to give an example of how this difference works out.
I think I tried to put this the change that I made in this after we discussed it the first time is contained in the paragraph which begins with some, and there's kind of an example there, a general example. If two representatives of different companies or different entities make a contractual agreement, the American is more likely to see each line in the contract as kind of like a rigid rule that everyone has to follow, whereas the Chinese party is more willing to accept modifications, not just their own modifications, but also the other side's modifications, and will want to, when there is modifications, they will want to discuss them, but they're more likely to call for such modifications or accept such modifications than the American, who will follow all like a rule. And then if they want to change anything, to call in 5,000 lawyers to rewrite the contract.
So this would apply in China in the relationships of different Chinese corporations to each other, that the relations can be fluid.
Exactly. I mean, I noticed this because when I was in China, I was fairly frequently had to make contractual relationships with hospitals and with companies and with branches of the Chinese government. And I pretty soon learned that the Chinese side, my instinctive idea was that once you make the agreement, every line in the agreement is like a rock. You got to stick to it. Whereas they were more fluid and willing to change things.
And do they feel that in order to make a change, they have to discuss it and come to a new agreement, or can one side just change?
I would, from my experience, both. Sometimes they would change things and, I might get upset about it, but they're perfectly willing to sit down and discuss it. And then if we come to another consensus, a lot of stuff, a lot of agreements in China are done that way rather than with lawyers and contracts and laws. They're made between individuals. They're, like you used the word fluid, it's more fluid.
Yes. I think I have heard Americans complain that they can make an agreement and then right away the Chinese do something different.
And I think that's what Robert is getting at here. We can come back to this and work on it some more if we...
No. I'm just interested in the facts. I'm not interested in. I think it's written well.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple people have their hand up. Maybe it'll help on this point. Maybe there are other points. Tandika, you were first, and then Jay and Tomas.
Thank you. Robert, I enjoyed the paper very much. Intuitively, it made sense to me. My question to you is this. What is the Mandarin word for thinking? In your title, perhaps you have a Western term that doesn't quite overlap with that which you're describing. And if you told us the Mandarin term or terms, we might not necessarily think of that as thinking, which is far more of a European approach of critical reasoning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and might not be in that way as sophisticated and broad as the Mandarin term, referring to something that's broader than thinking.
First of all, I'm I'm only half fluent in Mandarin. So if you had to answer the question, I would say the word shangfa. Shangfa is a word for thinking, a way of thinking that I would use. But there's a native Mandarin speaker on the call, so maybe she can she can help us with that.
Well, and I would clarify too that our primary audience is the American. But I appreciate the question.
And even a way of thinking is different than thinking.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad to have you on the
Way of thinking, I think shangfa is the way I would translate it, shangfa. But I'm not sure, yeah. Anyway.
Can I chime in?
Yes,
Just
please.
a quick bit. 想法 is more of a noun, thought. And if we use the word thinking to translate that into Chinese, it's a process, it's a verb. It could be 思考, the one I just put in the chat room. However, this 思考 is two characters. One is 思 and one is 考. I need to really dig in a bit more in this because I know for a fact that these two characters means different things. But one, you will see the first character underneath that there is a 心 character, right? 心 means heart, to think, but not only your brain is working, your heart is working in this process. So heart is very much in the center of thinking. And the second character is 考. I need to dig more. I will come back soon, but I just for a fact is the 考 means search back and forth, looking through back and forth into its different facts, different angles. So yes, this word actually means a lot, and I think maybe some of the process where this thinking initially was meant for Chinese coincide with what Robert has already covered in this paper. I just quickly jump in on this word here, and I'll come back a bit later.
Great, thank you so much. Jay.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to focus back on that paragraph we were discussing earlier about using the contrasting metaphors of the rock and the river. As a student of 16th century radical Reformation, what this reminded me of was the contrast between the formal kind of university disputations that took place between opposing religious views and the frustration that both Protestants and Catholics had in entering into dialogue with some of the radicals like the Anabaptists, who seemed to them to be constantly shifting their positions and could not be pinned down to a definite thesis which could be attacked or defended. And the historian Franklin Littell, very perceptively, I think, said that what this meant was that the Anabaptists would enter into discussions convinced that something might emerge from the dialogue that was apparent to none of the participants at the beginning. And I think that's a telling way of thinking about the contrast of these two metaphors, the rock and the river. At least that's what flashed through my mind.
Thank you for sharing it. Robert, did you want to comment on that, or John? Tomas, you have your hand up.
I like this paper a lot. Every time to hear it is good. I just had a quick question for Robert, and it was about the contract, which was, I guess from your experience, from what you've seen, do people in China, do they get like frustrated or not frustrated about the changing of the contract? And why would it be different? Like, why is their experience towards like the contract changing different than it is in the US?
That's a great question, Thomas. I don't know if I can correctly or fully answer it. It's they're more willing to accept a kind of come what may result, rather than be so focused on what the end result has to be that they want to stick with the contract. Now, an American will write the contract and start out, we're going to write a contract. It's almost like writing like building a machine. The purpose of the machine end up with the production of some product exactly made in a certain way with certain measurements and color, form, etc. Whereas the Chinese will just kind of like say, well, you know, we want a general goal, which is to the betterment of both of our parties, and both of our goals, both of our common goals. But we can change things along the way if we have to. It's a not as rigid, I think, as John put it, more fluid approach.
Thank you.
Yeah, I like this paper a lot too, because it covers so much. It's like the understanding the differences 101. You know, I've not visited China. I'm a lot more interested in going there as a result of participating in these conversations and seeing the slides that Bruce and Robert have shared with us from their recent visits. Any other? Let's go down now. Drum roll, ladies and gentlemen. I'm actually going to highlight our next respondent here. Come on, Miss Vivian. And don't hold anything back. I mean, you represent a huge blessing to us anytime you show up. So we're not going to take any offense at anything you share. We're going to be blessed by everything you share.
Oh no, I'm very moved actually. Thank you, first of all. Thank you so much, Robert, for even putting the effort and writing about this, and this it's well, I'm very touched. And I actually, as a Chinese, I've learned some different perspective about my culture through your paper. So I think these papers are not only for Americans, but also for Chinese who are, interested in a worldly thinking or different perspective of thinking about their own culture. And see, I'm using the word thinking in English, but really what I was meaning was the word and its real meaning in Chinese, which was what we were just discussing about. The word thinking in Chinese has a heart in it. It's not really cognitive. Well, maybe both cognitive, but heart is very much into it. In fact, the word 思考, the first character, I'll put up here again. The top part is field, rice field or wheat field, arable land, and underneath that is its heart. I don't know how to explain this, but I wanted to mention that it's multidimensional, how this was named in Chinese. And of course, this is both, in Chinese, it's both a verb and a noun. I believe this is also the case in English language. If you want to, but for Chinese, when we translate this word into Chinese, we will have to look into the context and then also grammatically how this word thinking is placed in a sentence. And then we will have to, as a translator, we'll have to find the right Chinese word for this. And I can tell you there are so many different words to translate this word. So first of all, I want to say that it is a very difficult topic. It's a vast topic, and then I'm very grateful, Robert, to make this effort in doing this. And I was very first paragraph I already like, and you started by how we were educated since born, and this part, if we can put up I'm not looking at myself on the big screen, but maybe we can go back to the paper, Charles. Thank you. At the very beginning here, I'd like to if possible, to kind of emphasize or add a few, is that the collectivism, the Chinese way of thinking is indeed collective oriented, but that collective initially was family. So a family was our first collective that we were learn with, eating together and doing festivals together. And even for me, I'm probably the most extreme. I was born and grown up in a compound, in a communist compound. I have had all kinds of collective life with my compound, including going to public baths. Yeah, and then the whole community it feels very close. But starting from a family, from a parents and grandparents, usually this is our Chinese family is organized, and grandparents, 2 of them, and parents, 2 of them, and 1 kids. As my generation, 1 child policy. So that's 5 people in a family. That's our first small collective. So family, starting from family, and then from maybe your work compound, and then to your community, and to a larger community, and of course. Television, CCTV 7, maybe that's a little fun thing, that every evening at 7 we have a very never changing half an hour around my generation to watch the CCTV news, where in the news we learn about what's happening in our countries, and usually good news. Very rarely, hardships, but usually good news. And we could learn. So through that newspaper, through that public media, as we were, I guess, trained collectively. So yeah, I would like to, if you want, add a little emphasize on first with a family, and then growing up and with a larger society as a whole.
Please, continue.
And then I also like the part about the painting somewhere you mentioned there as well. And here, yes. In the figures, the traditional figures, when I say the traditional cultures and paintings, it really means that the culture that shape us as a collective. Maybe for, I don't know, tradition in America means a bit more later, more more later thinkings, 100 years, 200 years. But for us, though, we were always looking at paintings and artworks and philosophical texts from much longer, deeper in the history, and that really gave us the sense of differences in the histories. But altogether, that continuous culture reinforced one generation after another, one dynasty after another, reinforced us in this way of collective thinking as today. And the painting, the landscape painting, what most interesting thing is, in the classic Chinese landscape paintings, you hardly see people in it. But if you look closely, there are little people in it doing various things, doing many things, and like hiking in the mountains or working in the field. Only if you look closely and you see their life. But if you take a bigger look, it's the nature that holds the main picture. That's more close to reality. And a human is embedded in the nature fabric. I think that's kind of a coding into our culture that we're not really see our too seriously. But of course, I think it brings troubles as well. It gives troubles of this over collectivism, never think about self, and that brings brings the downside to our culture. If you like, you can also mention that part a little bit to give a bit balance to the paper as well. So yeah, just a little part. And then I want to also have the same question with Dr. Cobb, that the 摸石头过河, the feeling stone crossing the river, I feel there is something gold in there. I want to hear more. How it's unique that you make this comparison. But how yeah, what some examples and how what do you mean that this might create conflicts, but using the term crossing the river by feeling the stone. Yeah, so I'm curious to hear more. Yeah, so yeah, that's my thinking for now.
Well, I would say for the record, this is being recorded and will be shared. And anyone who doesn't know that Vivian is the co-facilitator of the other new program that we launched at the same time with the Youth Dialogues Sharing from the Heart, which has been operating for about a year now. And during the Chinatown Hall that we sponsored with the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, Vivian asked some of the most intelligent questions for the ambassador that we're still passing along. And it seems like that the governor of California raised some of the same questions or concerns about youth exchanges, student exchanges. So good job. And thank you for being here. And what you just demonstrated in the last 15 minutes is a beautiful validation of the timeliness and the value of these papers and this process on having dialogue between Americans and Chinese to maybe help minimize the conflict and, oh my God, prevent a nuclear war. How great would that be? So any other comments or questions on this paper before we move on to another one? Thank you, everyone.
I'll just say thank you for an extremely insightful and helpful paper.
Last call for this one. We'll move on to the paper on the two-mountain theory. Let's see if I can bring this one up.
Wait, I think Celeste has his hand.
Oh, really? I don't see her. Yes, Celeste.
No, that was just coughing.
Okay. Let me check the chat, make sure there's not something here. Yeah, right. Tomas was commenting on your comment, Vivian, about not seeing the people. Like it reinforced the previous paragraph, you know, the individual is small, it's the collective that's big. Okay.
Are we allowed to insert pictures in the paper?
There are going to be versions of them that will have that. So yes, I mean, when Robert and Bruce shared their slide presentations of their recent visits, you know, I was saying, yes, bring them on. You know, they don't go in the series of just the papers themselves, but on the website and the other publications, yes. So I imagine you have quite a few from the presentations I've seen you deliver, Vivian, so bring them on. Okay, let's go on to paper number 2. I think I have it. The Two Mountains Theory, and Bruce is going to read this one for us. Are we seeing the paper?
Right. Yes, I see it. Thank you. Two Mountains Theory. I think this is particularly brought forward by Long, I thank you for it. The Two Mountains Theory encapsulates the idea that blue waters and green mountains are treasures as valuable as gold and silver. It originated in 2005 when Xi Jinping, then head of Zhejiang province, embarked on a 9-day inspection of Yukon village, an 800-year-old mountainside village in Anji County, Xizang province. Yukon village, sorry, my pronunciation isn't probably correct, was once a polluted and impoverished pig farming community with a polluted river and deforested mountains. The villagers lived in poverty and struggled to feed themselves. Today, Yukon Village, as well as Anji County, as the birthplace of the Two Mountains Theory, stands not only as a remarkable example of ecological transformation, such as cooking with biogas from pig manure, vigorously planting bamboo and developing bamboo products, but also has become a thriving and eco-friendly model community where people own sense of belonging and happiness. The implementation of this theory has attracted numerous visitors and tourists from both within and outside the country. The Two Mountains theory marks a significant shift in China's ecological policies. It has transcended its origins in a small village to become an integral part of Xi Jinping's ecological civilization ideology as he ascended to the position of China's supreme leader. The theory advocates for a different approach to the environment, emphasizing the improvement and preservation of nature's resources and deriving wealth from its beauty and clean waters, rather than exploiting them solely for development purposes. In China, the understanding of the Two Mountains theory has evolved over time. Initially, people prioritized economic prosperity, represented by gold mountains, before considering environmental preservation, symbolized by green mountains. However, as the severe environmental challenges became evident, people gradually recognized the need for both green and gold mountains. Eventually, they came to realize that green mountains hold greater significance, as gold mountains are meaningless without them. The wisdom of the Two Mountains theory lies not only in its departure from conventional development models, but also in transcending the dichotomy between economic growth and environmental preservation. It represents a new paradigm where the economy and the environment can progress hand in hand. Consequently, provincial governors in China are now evaluated based on both economic growth and ecological well-being. Some Western critics view the Two Mountains theory as an early sustainable development initiative by China, predating the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals established in 2015 and the launch of the EU taxonomy by 15 years. Recently, the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, has published a report entitled Green is Gold to disseminate China's practices in building ecological civilization. This signifies that the Two Mountains theory has received recognition as a substantial contribution from China towards globally recognized principles. However, despite the theory's appeal and the influence of Xi Jinping, implementing it on a national scale faces challenges due to the deep-rooted and enduring influence of Western neoliberal economics, particularly the focus on GDP worship influenced by economism. Additionally, local governments and interest groups closely associated with economism present significant obstacles to implementing the Two Mountains theory and advancing ecological civilization. Nevertheless, the Two Mountains theory represents substantial progress compared to the sole purpose of material wealth. This manifests in China's recent progress in reducing carbon emissions and in energizing its renewable energy industries. Regarding the former goal, recent reductions in industrial output have put China on target to achieve zero emissions by 2060. Regarding alternative energy sources, China now leads the world in solar cell production, and China is the major supplier of these cells to most African and Asian countries. China dominates the world in the production of electric vehicle batteries. NASA, using satellite images, has recently reported that the surface of the Earth has become greener since 2000, and the world leader in this greenification is China, mostly due to reforestation. However, China still has a long path to meet the requirements of an ecological civilization, where the economy directly supports the well-being of natural ecosystems. China could adopt economic indicators like genuine progress indicator that measures human well-being rather than economic activity, much of which is destructive, and ignore production that is not compensated, such as housework and volunteerism. By measuring social growth in such a way, China can unite its two mountains into one that will enjoy long-term sustainability. It will also be necessary for the United States and other countries to work together with China in achieving a range of ever greener mountains that cover the globe with clean air and water, blue skies, and happy people.
Blue skies and happy people. I love it. Let me save that with the changes that I made. Just 1 minute.
Mhm.
If you have questions or comments, please raise your hand in the chat function. And Vivian, I know you're going to come in there. Looking forward to that one.
Mhm.
Who else? Anyone else? John Cobb? We will go to Vivian.
Yes, Bruce, I like this. Thank you. It's quite new. I mean, in Chinese it's not new, but it's quite rare to hear about this discussed in English language. But that I like this part particularly because you trace the history, you trace the back, how it started and where it started. And then I think moving on, there are a little bit of hiccups that is, going through in China. I think it's important to show that this is not a one single best unified, everybody agreed best solution for all, but it is a commitment that China is doing, and we have up and down, but kind of the commitment that we're trying to meet. I think in this tone, probably more easier understandable by our American friends, like, like China's thinking that they have the best solution. No, to be honest, not. But would also be interesting to if we start from beginning, the village is Yucun. Cun means village, so you could also say Yu village, Yu or Yucun village. This is fine. I put up some pictures in the chat room, and it used to be a mining and logging places, and then that's where everything changed, and now Yucun becomes this really popular touristic spot that all kinds of mainly party members all around China had to go there and learn about the history, how this is developed, and learn about this two mountain series from there. And it also has, I think, the first called Two Mountain Academy over there. That academy, China has the policy, and then had this academy, so people, not general people, but the party members or leaders all have to go on a yearly basis to go and learn the Two Mountain theory and its further development. I also want to mention that Anji, this province, the Anji County, is also the first county in China to do its GEP. If it finish its general ecological product accounting, GEP accounting. I just made a quick research. After the GEP counting, Anji County, its own Green Mountain and Blue Water worth 40 million, 40 million. 40 million only for its forest and wetlands. Anyway, I could send you more data over here. I also haven't done this myself, so this is a good point that I'm also I can do a little research on this. So it finished its GEP accounting, general ecological value accounting. So this is an interesting part. And then also I think for our American friends, it would be interesting for them to understand that what does it mean to implement this two mountain theory. Doesn't mean that we have to close up all the mines or tighten up our local regulations on certain industries. Well, all these are applied. Once the theory is implied and it's in the layers, from the national layer, provincial layer, local layer, village layer even, there are a lot of policies and fundings. Policy, strict regulation for certain thing that used to be making a lot of money but no longer able to operate. I think including all these mines, and at the same time, the fundings are issued to complement the loss of that. So this might be things interesting to add a few lines over there to have the readers understand how the vast cost the country is doing by issuing this policy. Yes, that's my main thoughts. And I also want to bring awareness to it's something that I am reading lately. I'm a bit shocked and I don't know yet how to understand it. Is that we're about to enter the COP28 in Dubai this year. I think a lot of world leaders are talking about the carbon negotiations and different new policies. And the Chinese envoy delegation made a pre-announcement that they think that phasing out fossil energy is not realistic for China. So it's slightly kind of counter the strict two mountain policy there, but I think this is something worth watching. How China is kind of continue battling on this commitment. Again, so this good to say that this is not a set and done. It's something that we've made a commitment, but we have counter a lot of twists and turns. It's whether we're really able to pull it off, and I think it's come back to the collective. It's our collective whether we're able to deliver and this amount task. Yes.
Thank you. Bruce, have your hand up?
Yeah, Vivian, as you're talking, one of the things that struck me is that China's approach sounds a lot like many of the developing countries around the world. Not so much so it's not in one sense that the two mountain, its impact in the United States for me was less clear than it is as a voice for many of the countries that still have economic development goals. They have to really they have a lot yet to do. I think China's been amazing in its ability to pull, 750 million people out of poverty, largely. It's been a huge economic change, and there's more yet to come. So I agree. So that's kind of the context I'm thinking of it, is that it ends up becoming a very good a voice for other countries in the world and cultures as well.
Well, again, Vivian, your insight and very helpful, very helpful. I just wanted to add that while Bruce read this paper, all of us are involved in all of the papers. There's a lot of Robert in this one too. In fact, I think the last version may have come back from Robert. It's just been a very exciting co-creative process of letting these come forth. And you are most welcome. Everyone here is most welcome to contribute to continue to offer your contribution. Any other comments on this one, or we'll go on to China's ecological civilization with Dr. Cobb? Any hands up? Yes, Tomas.
I just had one, which was I thought Joha said that for that town, I don't have the paper in front of me, I don't remember the name or know how to pronounce it, but for that town, I was under the impression that it was like a tree cutting town, or like, no, it was for forestry, right? So they would cut wood. And my understanding was that they were told to do logging, and they ended up actually cutting down all the trees, and then having no essential business to go from. And the town was important because they ruined their environment, and then I guess Xi Jinping went there and they fixed it, and now it's like a big tourism place. Actually, I wasn't under the impression that they were getting money, or it seemed like they were like they self-fixed actually.
Was that a yes, Vivian?
Do you mean the where the Two Mountains theory was erased first, the Yucun?
I think so, yeah.
Yes, it is. It is because it's the birthplace of this whole concept and an idea. So it receives initial the most fundings, including setting up the academy and having the whole. You can click the link that I sent. You can see all the pictures before and after. So that's the lucky town. It gets the total transform. But to get a lot of other towns in China, the early they pledge. They will also receive certain fundings to it, but then making the pledge also means that making commitment of closing up some mining businesses or several things. That so you make this commitment, then you receive this candies. That's in a nutshell. But
okay, that makes sense.
After several years, because this was first what initiated in the early in the 2010-ish. So after several years, the policy began spreading around the country. The first to have a few testing zones, testing counties, testing areas with fundings, and the country level putting their effort in it, and then once they have learned some lessons, they promote it to other side of the countries. This is very much SEZ, a special economic zone style, how Shenzhen was first developed. You first set up a small testing zone, testing the ideas and differences, and see whether the policies are applicable, and then you expand it to larger countries.
Oh, and I was going to say, actually, because when you were saying that was very interesting, because it reminded me of some of the books from like authors during the Industrial Revolution, and how they would go right in the West, at least, right, from their factory be performing poorly, and Adam Smith was like, oh, they'll go to the good performing factory, learn what's happening, and then copy it.
Yeah. Basically, it is. I think it's that's the wisdom China is getting from the U.S. perhaps.
Okay, thank you both. We're going to go on now to another paper. China's ecological civilization. Are we seeing the paper?
Yes.
Okay, John Cobb, would you like to read this one?
You want me to read it?
Yes, sir.
The term ecological civilization was first used in 1978 by Irene Fletcher, a German political scientist engaged in research on Hegel and Marxism. In 1983, a Chinese scholar, Xenshan Zhao, used the term, and in 1984, a scientist in the former Soviet Union called for an ecological civilization. In 1987, Qianji Ye, a Chinese agricultural economist, used the term to plead for a more sustainable agricultural development model. In 1995, in Ecological Democracy, 1955, Charles Morrison stated that the idea of ecological civilization was first officially proposed by the Chinese government in 2007 at the 17th Congress of the Communist Party of China. At that time, the goal identified by the term is to form an energy and resource efficient and environmental friendly structure of industries, pattern of growth, and mode of consumption. In 2012, ecological civilization was written into the CPC Constitution. In 2018, it was also written into China's national constitution. China announced its intention of making ecological civilization its goal. It is, of course, far from that goal, but it has taken significant steps. The government invested 922 billion yuan for protecting and improving the environment in 2016, 6.9 times as much as in 2001. One highly visible improvement has been in forest cover. In the past 5 years, China has completed 508 million mu of afforestation, and its forest coverage is now 3.12 billion mu. This is 20.66% of the land of China. The forest stock volume is 15,137 billion cubic meters. China's increase of forest in the past 5 years is the greatest of any country. Ecological civilization means in China that alongside the almost universal goal of economic growth as measured by GDP, China is committed to improving its natural environment. China considers these two goals compatible and of equal importance. This is called the two-mountain theory, and it is quite remarkable that China has combined rapid industrialization with maintaining its environment and improving it in many respects. The success in greatly reducing extreme poverty, in fact, is an extremely important contribution to a healthy ecological civilization in the enlarged sense. Nevertheless, it is important to recognize that outside of China, an ecological civilization is usually understood differently. It is understood as the inclusive goal. It would subordinate economic policies to questions of how the economy can contribute to the overall well-being of life on the planet. Considerations of sustainability and human health and happiness will be in tension with GOP annual growth, even from the strict economic perspective. GDP might be replaced by a measure that includes sustainability, thus reducing the tension between the two mountains. Even so, as time passes, it seems inevitable that China's both-and approach will not always work. Whether China's vision of ecological civilization will expand to guide judgments about the economy remains to be seen. In the meantime, many developing countries are much more likely to adopt the goal of ecological civilization as understood by China. They will adopt it as complementing their existing goal of economic growth. Very rare will be explicit abandonment of the goal of growth, even though many advocates of ecological civilization believe that overall growth will and must end.
Thank you, John. Comments or questions, anyone? Vivian, what do you have to share with us?
I have one parts that I wasn't sure. Well, first of all, thank you, John. I think the paper leaves savory, like something's like a soup that you eat, and then you feel like there's something more to it. I feel like I need to read a few times, but I like all the datas over here. I think that's very that make the paper credible. And the part about reforestation, that's really true. And in fact, China, I think, also hosts one of the largest ecological restoration projects around the world. That's the Losses Plateau reforestation for over a decade. This Losses Plateau in the Shanxi area that experienced a whole generation was deployed in planting trees and restoring its ecosystems, and the whole area is, from the barren land to lush forest. That's a project and case study that's still being discussed today. So reforestation is something we did, and then I wasn't sure about a part. I understood it correctly. If you scroll down a little bit, Charles, thank you. That Chinese things about economy where the world understand it differently. Is here. Nonetheless, it's important to recognize that outside of China, an ecological civilization is usually understood differently. It is understood as the inclusive goal. I want to make sure that this sentence, it is understand as inclusive goal. It would subordinate economic policy. Is this what you think what the world think, or what the Chinese think under ecological civilization?
Well, my understanding is that the two mountain theory makes these two goals distinct, and that they are both pursued, and that one is not subordinated to the other. And the other way is to think a civilization has an economic system. So a very important part of an ecological civilization will be how it handles its economy. It's not a separate matter, but it's part of the constitution of an ecological civilization. So the two mountain theory keeps two goals separate that in most places, when we use the word ecological civilization, are unified.
Okay, I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
At one point, those two papers were one, the two mountains theory and the ecological civilization, and they grew into these two separate documents. So it's about 1:15. We have one paper left, and it's pretty significant by John Perkins on economic hitman. So if you can stay with us, please do so. I want to go ahead and capture that. But first, David Stoney has his hand up. David, yes.
Thanks very much, Charles. Thank you very much, John. So the paper is principally for American audiences, these series of papers. In that case, I wonder about the designation of currency, the mu, and whether that's going to be understood and the significance of that by an American audience. I wonder if that could use a little additional information. I was also curious about the cubic meters of wood or such in the forest. I wasn't clear about what exactly that was. I thought that area could be expanded just a bit.
You have earned your prize. When we last discussed that paper, someone raised that question about hectares. What does that mean? And yes, our purpose is to facilitate understanding, and those are beautifully valuable contributions. John, did you want to respond further to that from David?
I think I would have to see what we now have again, and in order to talk about how to expand. I don't want to try to expand just verbally here.
No, well, yes, I understand. And it could be that there's a chart or a diagram or some conversion that's at the bottom of papers where it's relevant, because that it came up in the Two Mountains paper as well. So thank you, David. And Robert has his hand up.
Yeah. I think the David's point is that, for example, if you change mu into acres, and then if you just had a short sentence or a phrase to explain how you measure the volume of a forest, because I also don't know what that is. I don't know how they measure the volume of a forest. And one other thing I thought that might be a good idea to throw in, so people understand when you're talking about how in Western countries that there isn't a two mountain theory. Some people are proposing basing the economy on ecological civilization. For example, the proposals in the United States, which unfortunately didn't go anywhere, for the Green New Deal. That is, the Green New Deal was a way of building up the economy based on ecology, not just based on GDP. So if you throw in an example like that, I think it immediately becomes clear to Americans what you mean. Maybe that's not a good idea, but I thought that might be something.
Robert, appreciate that. Vivian's nodding her head, so I think you get the Vivian seal of approval. Okay, let's go on to one more paper. Let's see. All right, Tomas, you see on the screen?
Yeah, I can read it. Just I also didn't write the paper, so I can't answer all the questions.
No.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Here we go. So hitmen, American and Chinese. During the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the United States executed an active program of development in the lower income countries of the global South. The United States aimed to cultivate neoliberal economics and political systems that would ally with the United States against the Soviets. The American public understood this as an act of generosity. John Perkins was a player in this program. He refers to the representatives of the United States who worked with the lower income governments in this way as economic hitmen. The term reflects his disillusionment and regret regarding participating in this program. In his trilogy of Confessions of an Economic Hitman books, Perkins exposed the nature of the relationships he and other hitmen arranged with the governments of developing countries. The United States loaned money to the lower income nation with the condition that the money would be used to hire US contractors to build infrastructure projects, highways, ports, etc. The recipient countries used their natural resources, oil, minerals, etc., as a collateral for large loans from the United States through banks controlled by the United States. The American companies profited greatly, as did the few individuals in the lower income countries. In many cases, lower income countries could not repay these loans. This resulted in American corporations expropriating the natural resources of the debtor countries. The United States and its wealthy corporations thus controlled the natural resources of many developing countries to their own benefit, with little consideration for the lower income nation's people. If such a nation refused to accept the takeover of its resources, the United States sent in what Perkins called the jackals. The jackals used violence, including assassinations and coups, to enforce American dominance. This program also paid little to no attention to local environmental issues in lower income countries. This resulted in environmental deterioration in much of the global South. In 2013, China launched its Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. This program also enables the development of lower income countries using large infrastructure loans. However, the Chinese effort does not coerce governments to accept the loans and the accompanying contracts of the extent that the United States does. There are no jackals, no assassinations, and no coups. In many cases, China has forgiven loans that the debtor countries found difficult or impossible to reimburse. Some economists have compared the BRI to the post-World War II Marshall Plan that rebuilt the war-devastated economies of Western Europe. Both the United States Hitman program and the BRI result in environmental destruction in the developing world. Both programs of development are designed to change the culture in the direction of modernization. Modernization increases global consumption, even though the present level of consumption is unsustainable. Increased consumption inevitably results in the ecological decline and what Perkins calls the death economy. China's success in this competition has weakened American dominance in much of the world, and it has heightened American resentment toward China, which suggests reading John Perkins' book, Confessions of Economic Hitman, 3rd edition. Oh, Charles, I think you're muted.
Thank you, Tomas. I was also thanking John Perkins, who's been so generous at showing up and producing major programs with us for World Unity Week, Peace Week, and a couple of our monthly meetings, but he's been traveling in Europe and wasn't able to join us today. Any questions or comments about that paper? Anybody learn anything new from that paper? It was pretty shocking. I met John Perkins lifetimes ago at Social Venture Network, and he shared so many stories of that as a 15-year civil servant employee, I was very embarrassed to learn about.
I
Okay.
would like to ask the group, in general, do you feel like the papers sound objective, fair, or do they sound too pro-Chinese? I'm not saying in terms of truth, I just mean in terms of how the American reader will read them.
Robert has his hand up. I'd like to hear from Kenneth and Becca and David.
Just a
And this
quick
person.
answer. I think they all sound very fair and neutral. I don't think they sound like, I don't think any of the papers sound like they're too pro-Chinese. And they're implicit in the Hitman paper and in the ecological civilization paper some serious and I think valid criticisms of China. So I think they're fair.
Good, thank you. I hope that's right. I mean, I think in general, China comes off better than the United States on most of these issues. But I think if we emphasize that too much, we just get a negative reaction.
I think that's a great question, and that's why we're having this experiment, which we're deeply grateful to each one of you for being here. But Kenneth or David or Tandaka or this other gentleman, I don't know who you are, please share your thoughts. Yes, ma'am.
This last paper, Hitman, is really provocative. I do not take issue with anything that's said. It's a very depressing and very honest paper. And I believe something else is missing, is needed. I don't know what that is, but something else is needed. Otherwise, people who do not believe this is true will not accept the argument, because it is so extraordinarily negative toward the United States and also China. So I haven't a clue as to what should be added to the paper so that persons will read the entire paper and consider the argument anew instead of being affronted.
I am deeply grateful for your sharing that, and I know that you're going to be happy with our sharing it with John Perkins. He has recorded several presentations that led to the establishment of a new life economy synergy circle among the evolutionary leaders where he and David Corton are active participants. And what you have suggested, I believe, will add substantial further value and contributions to our initiative. And I deeply appreciate your contributions. Thank you. John, would you agree with that?
Yes, I'm concerned about it. I think the plain fact is that the United States has imperial ambitions, which cause it to take actions that are not China does not have. So I think that the facts are that the United States is more dangerous to the health of the planet than China. And I don't think we want to deny that, but on the other hand, I worry about the reaction.
Well, I think that, again, to me, it's a perfect example of the benefit of doing what we're doing today to get additional perspectives of how we might want to take suggestions into consideration to help us be more successful at being perceived as just providing truth. Thank you very much. Bruce Hanson.
Well, I was struck. I really was struck by Vivian's comments regarding the ongoing, what thinking is and the thinking process and engaging it. And that's kind of what I hope for all these papers, is that there's unfinished business everywhere. And it's all an invitation to think together about how we can do this in the most productive way. So I think I really do appreciate, like, I can see the criticism, that the two mountain theory is kind of a bit of a paradox. It's there, how much you combine them, or it's helpful to keep them separated as well. So I think they all kind of set up a little bit of a setting that's yet to be solved. And so, Thanika, I think that's a very good comment to talk about it, is like maybe something that shows that ongoing conversation around the resource, the Silk Road Initiative, both the United States and China, about where that conversation might lead, which would have more of a positive character then at the end.
I think it's very good if we think of these papers as always in process.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be no such thing as completing them and perfecting them.
Exactly. Thank you. Tomas and Vivian have their hand.
That was very good, Thanika, for your point about the economic hitman. Because when I first heard this paper and heard John Perkins talk about it maybe half a year ago, I thought it was a lot of baloney too, actually. I was like, this is too far-fetched. I could see the CIA doing this, but I could see the CIA also doing everything. But getting to know John as well a little bit over the, I guess, few months, I've seen it very plausible. But back to your point, would it be helpful to find evidence? I agree, to find evidence, because I found just right from the freedom of information, I don't know if there's evidence to back these things up. But from the US perspective, it might be possible to get the points. And you think, would that help? I don't know about the Chinese part, because I don't read or speak Chinese, so I can't really do much research there besides what's in English.
Well, John,
this is for Thanika.
I'm not, perhaps more facts, but that's not the point that I'm really making. I once wrote a paper, began a paper with the statement, Americans are a traumatized people. Mm-hmm. And I gave the paper to a friend who is a major banker in America. And I said, would you please read this and just give me your opinion? He called me an hour later or so and said, I'm sorry, I can't get past the first sentence. I refuse to read the paper because I'm offended by the first sentence. I'm coming from that point. I believe everything that the paper said is true, and then some. But if we want to speak to people who do not believe this. There has to be a way in and around it so that we keep them engaged. Otherwise, we're simply preaching to the choir.
Thank you again. I've heard John Perkins several times at Unity Earth or Humanity Rising. He has what you're asking for, and he, I believe, will be as grateful as I am for you asking the question and pursuing it. And Tomas, for you too, since you're part of that little small study group, we can bring it up directly with John. David and Robert have their hand up now.
Thank you, Charles. I like the papers. I love their and I don't think that they are particularly favoring China over the U.S., though I could see how someone might think that. The one thought that arose for me is whether there might accompany the papers a kind of a appendix where some sources be links or books, sources to validate some of the information in the papers might be listed. I don't know if that's planned or not. Might be helpful to, it's nice to know about John Perkins' book, for example. So that might be something that people who begin to question the assertions would be able to look at and find informative, hopefully honest sources about. So that's just a suggestion.
Well, thank you, David. And yes, that is the intent. The only time we have had a specific reference was for John Perkins in recognition of how gracious he's been with his time and resources. So there will be those types of resources. And on the first paper that we read today, there had been a paragraph at the bottom that explained that, this paper is part of a series of papers published by the Living Earth Movement for this purpose. And here's the website link where you can go and find those types of resources that you're referencing. And while you broke up a little bit there, I deeply appreciate your opening comment that you did not feel that the papers were unfairly positive towards China. And I'm sure John Cobb was pleased with that too. Right, John?
Yes, thank you. No, we could easily produce some papers which would only be read by people who are just like us. And that would be far too small an audience to do much good. So I have tried to, insofar as I have done any editing or suggestions, I've just tried to keep from sounding as if we were saying China is better than us. That may be true, but it's it won't sell easily in the U.S.
Thank you. Robert has his hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to echo David's comment. I totally agree that it would be a good idea to have at the bottom of each paper, it wouldn't take much more space, a list of 2, 3, or 4 reference sources. I think John Perkins' book is a very good example. I think what we asked John Perkins to do was to summarize the 300-page book into a 1-page paragraph, which is extremely difficult to do, and to give it the proper context, you really need to get the evidence that Thandeka is talking about and the critiques we've heard here. You really need to read the book. And similarly with the other papers, it's much better if you have some source material that people can go to, because many people, I think more than you expect, will, after they finish reading the paper, they say, oh gosh, that's interesting, but what are the sources of this? Where can I fact check this? Where can I see if this is really true? And I think having the sources on the bottom that you used are a simple and efficient addition to each of the papers.
Well, thank you, Robert. I believe that you're right, that there's going to be a larger benefit from our efforts than we may have even imagined. I've done more research onto the National Committee for the U.S.-China relations. They're generating between $7 and $10 million a year in funding to do essentially what we set out to do. And our annual budget's under 50K. And so I'm offering them lots of opportunities. And I did speak with a major publisher earlier this week who's published several significant global bestsellers around global movements recently. He's very familiar with John Cobb and these papers and is interested in helping us not only get them published, but as John Raymer committed to make sure that the right people read them and act upon them. So that leads right into Vivian.
Well, I want to say a little bit on the other side of the story, since we're to keep it balanced. This series of questions, that series of papers, to me as a Chinese, first of all, I felt very touching and very moved that our friends from the other side of the ocean, having all this effort and trying to understand our culture. That's, on one hand, I think it's very, it's admirable. And then John's questions, like whether we are saying too positive about China, what I can say from American perspective, but I think from a Chinese perspective, it's valid, it's fair. But I would probably add more on the fact that the same thing as I mentioned in the previous comments in different papers, that there all these policies are all this informations land also as a process in China. It's not one and set. It's creating ripples through space and time around the country. It also, in a short term, the Two Mountains theory and the ecological civilization, for example, it creates a lot of disturbance of our current economy, and people actually greatly affected by this. There are loss of jobs, real, and because in transition, the community that I work very closely with was precisely the community that affected by these policies. Next to a national park, used to be miners, then lost their job because of that rigid policy making. So it's true that it creates local thing. So I wonder, just from here or there in our papers, we could add a few lines awareing that these issues, these topics, of course, is not perfect, or just be having a few of this type of sentences and suggesting there's discussion about it, and it's ongoing process, as our friends earlier mentioned. I think it's good, not only in the end of the paper opening up for discussion, but also could have a few sentences in the paragraph showing that this is an ongoing discussion, that ongoing process that open for discussion. That's one way probably to balance that. And another thing I was thinking is, why are we reading this? Why do Americans need to read this? I think the why part should be emphasized if we want these papers to have a wider audience, not only friends who are already in favor of China or curious about China, but a little bit for larger audience. I see this has great opportunities. I was going to ask whether there will be a cover paper, but apparently there is. That's great. Perhaps in the cover paper could be mentioned that there are why the reasons for us as Americans to read this. And then secondly, the things that in American society, the reasons for it, or the hiccups, the difficulties that we're facing, could we open up our eye to a different culture and perhaps suggesting possible solutions? And these are a few papers that we could look at just for your reference. The economy stagnations, or infrastructure issues, or I don't know, American families, or intergenerational problems here in the society. If we could mention a few problems that in our American society that could be addressed by this paper, could that be an approach to lure our readers to get into this paper? So that's my second point. And the third, which is the last, I was thinking that it's not only American needs to read about this. I think it's important for the world that these two, it matters how these two countries really, what are these two countries are doing or seeing the world, like that, the action, the active matters. Yes, we understand each other. And then does that opens up collaboration? Does that open some further collaborate view to the world? Here we don't want to be binary thinking who is right or wrong, or American, pointing fingers to American that, oh, look, China's doing pretty good, we're not doing good. No, we don't want to create this these feelings that make me feel regret, make me feel and could that be like an approach? It's adding on to what we already have, and so to make us whole, to make us more complete, make us more smarter, more holistic. So the Eastern and Western thinking all together, and that will be probably a more friendlier tone, I guess, for American friends. It's not either or. It's adding on to what we already have to make American thinking better by reading this paper.
Well, I'm so glad you're back home so that you can continue to offer your brilliant insights. I put a link in the chat to the page on the Living Earth Movement website that introduces, it's actually the first introduction that John wrote to this project. I put another link in the chat to one of 3 introductory papers, and those 4 components will be evolved, refined into one opening paragraph or chapter in the publication after you have reviewed and refined them. So they will be coming to you for that review. Thank you for volunteering. Tomas has his hand up again.
Oh, that was very interesting. I just wanted to say, like, you said such great things, but I can only focus on one thing at a time. It was interesting that you said that in China there's like a real price to pay for the two mountains, right, with the job loss, because and I just don't think that's well known here, because right, a lot of the U.S., right, they see as like the job loss of Americans to China, right, for manufacturing. A lot of that probably was due to, outside of what could be manufactured cheaper there, like the pollutive processes that could no longer be done in the U.S., right, like legally, and so then they exported to China. And it's interesting, they job loss there, but China's experiencing the same issue, and it'd be interesting to almost draw the similarities for the people, right? Because there's, like I said, there's no free lunch for this. And right now, the paper kind of makes it seem like there's a free lunch to be had.
Thank you, Tomas. Thank you, Vivian.
Yeah.
John Cobb, we're 30 minutes over, and this, I believe, has been one of, if not the most productive session we've had. Would you like to close us out?
Well, I think we are making progress, and Charles, if there's something else you need before we can present these to the public, and I can help with it, please let me know. but we may turn into others of you also. But I think it's time we go public.
Before you came in, I had shared that now that we're past Peace Week and the Chinatown Hall, that the priority is just that.
Okay.
So your wish, Mr. Chairman, is my command. Right?
Okay. And please, everybody, understand that the fact that we've gone public doesn't mean we won't keep changing. So I think that's, in terms of what we were hearing about the Chinese style, a distinction from the American style, I think that's rather on the Chinese side. But if you think you can improve a paragraph, try and send it to us.
And I will pledge to share draft to the maximum extent possible, share draft publication with anyone who is interested, especially those of you who have shown up here today. We've had 5 people show up for the first time to one of these meetings to hear what we've been working on for a year. And I would say the evidence so far is that it's a worthwhile initiative and that we've gotten some great insights to further enhance them, to further improve the effectiveness of our plan. And now I can get closer to not having Robert hammer me. When are we going to share? When are we going to share? When are we going to publish them, Charles? So thank you all, one and all, for your time, for your attention, for your energy, for your contributions. Be blessed. Stay safe. Keep on keeping. God bless you, John Cobb.
And thank Charles, because it's Charles who is really moving us forward now and making things actually happen. And we're going to get the word out there. That's because of Charles. Thank you.
Well, because of all of you, thank you. It's a mutual admiration society. Thank you all. Bless you.
Okay.
Thank you.